All right, we're ready to get started. The time is 5:30 p.m. and this meeting is hereby called to order. We have the presence of a quorum and the meeting has been duly called and notice of the meeting has been posted for the time and manner required by law. First up, our information item is our TAPER report, District Texas Academic Performance Report. Dr. Dupree.
Yes, sir. This evening we're going to do our annual update, and then we'll take public comment after that, but I'll turn the show over to Deanna Saavedra, our Chief Academic Officer.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Dupree. Good evening, Board President, members of the board, and Dr. Dupree and community. Tonight, the Academic Affairs Division, in collaboration with the Department of School Leadership, will be providing an update on Fort Bend ISD's 2018 accountability rating under the new A through F system. Accountability and Assessment, led by Audra Udi, will begin by presenting an overview of our rating system and the scores earned by Fort Bend ISD, followed by Teaching and Learning, led by Stephanie Williams, who will provide information about instructional supports and the community-based accountability currently under development. Finally, the Department of School Leadership will share information about leadership supports and school improvement efforts. Dr. Udi?
Ma'am, I'm sorry, Ms. Udi.
There we go. Thank
There
you.
you
Good evening, Dr. Dupree and members of the board. This evening, we will be speaking to the TAPER report for the district and summarizing district-level performance data for you. The first thing that I would like to do is take you through the ratings, as we are required to report each year what our ratings are in our various categories. First of all, in our first rating, which is our financial rating for the district, Mr. Bassett spoke to that a couple of board meetings ago, and we did receive an A or a superior rating for the 2017-18 school year. Last school year for accountability, that's state and federal accountability incorporated into one, we were not rated as a district because, if you'll recall, we all suffered the effects of Hurricane Harvey, and we're out 10 days with the effects of Harvey and then 2 additional weather days last year. And due to that circumstance, TEA decided to not rate districts that were impacted by that situation. Otherwise, the district did earn a B in the area of our overall performance last year, and we will get an official rating this coming year for the 18-19 year. Overall, we were accredited, meeting all of the TEA requirements for accountability and our special programs. In addition, we report specifically on certain programs, and so in our special education area, we did meet all of our requirements and so have been designated as such. And new this year is the ASVAB indicator, which we do now have state law that requires us to make available the ASVAB testing for all students who wish to participate in the testing. So every single high school offers a time, sometime during the year, where students may take the ASVAB. And then finally,
I'm sorry,
yes,
just
sir.
1 second. Can we get the door closed? Can we not close the door? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, and just for clarity for our audience members, the ASVAB testing is the military testing. So it's an aptitude test to assess whether or not a student might be interested in going into one of the military divisions. And so we do have military recruiters who come out and help administer the test. Again, it is on a voluntary basis. It is not required of students to participate in the ASVAB. And then finally, we must also include our campus and district performance objectives as a part of our full TAPER report, which will be published on the FBISD website after we have the hearing this evening. And we must incorporate our own data in regards to violent or criminal incidences on campus or anywhere in the district on district premises, and our performance in post-secondary institutions. At this time, one of our brand new team members, Mr. Christopher Freeman, who we're very proud to have in the role of Director of Accountability and Assessment, will come up and present the next several slides summarizing student achievement performance for us tonight. Okay.
Good evening, Dr. Dupree, board members. I'll speak to the TAPER slides. The first one, our first slide here is, we know that Fort Bend is a very diverse district, and this slide provides the demographics with race, ethnicity as a participation in 2017 and 18, and the programs that are offered. This graphic represents our staff demographics by employee categories and teachers by years of experience. This slide is our star performance levels.
Chris, you might want to talk a little bit about what's on each slide.
Okay. The star performance levels are mentioned here, are listed here. This represents the scale score necessary for each of the performance levels. We have the did not meet, meaning the students that did not pass, approaches for those students that did pass, meets and masters. All three of those levels are passing levels. And if you notice that the scale score for 2017 and 2018 are the same for each level. Approaches grade level and above for grades 3 through 8 and EOC, or end of course exam. This slide represents our approaches grade level compared to the region and state, and it summarized grades 3 through 8 and the EOC. And if you notice, Fort Bend is performing above the state and region average. This slide kind of takes the approaches level and breaks it into student groups or ethnicities. If you notice also, it's kind of the same slide. It's broken down by ethnicities. We are performing, as mentioned before, above the state, region average, and we're also working on closing the gaps between our individual student groups as well. The college career military readiness by student group. This slide is actually originally from 2018. This is the first time we've been kind of assessed with this under this new standard. This chart represents the performance broken out by demographic groups and programs. There are several ways that students can earn college and career military readiness indicators or meet those indicators, or CCMR. They can perform by a 3, 4, or 5 on an AP exam or an advanced placement exam. They can earn credit from dual credit. They can also by enlisting in the military and completing a career path or industry certification. So now we'll move to the meets level. The first level was approaches. Now we're at the meets. And then the final one, as we move along, we'll get to the masters. This one shows the meets level based on all content areas. And it also includes the state, region, and Fort Bend ISD averages. And as you can see, we are still, again, performing above those averages. Looking at the meets level again, we've taken it and kind of drilled down a little bit, and now we're looking at the meets level by student group. Again, as mentioned before in all the previous slides, we are performing above the region and the state average, and we're also working to close the gaps between all of the student groups or the ethnicities.
Might be beneficial for the board to hear a little bit about, are we closing the gap? How did these numbers look last year compared to this year?
That is something that I don't have with me at this very moment, but I can get that answer for you very shortly. I have it available. I just don't have it in front of me at this moment. But I can get it to you very quickly.
And Dr. Dupree, as we get to some of the instructional supports, we will be able to address some of that information as well.
one of the things that we have produced and will share with you shortly is that we have trend lines over the last 3 to 5 years. And we do see that we continue to have kind of a flat line performance across multiple years, and some gaps that still exist between our all student category and our white category and our other race and ethnicity groups, as well as between our special ed and our English language learners or our English learners. And so that's an area that's priority for us, is to continue to strive to close those gaps in performance between our students. Okay. Go ahead.
We also have the meets level, the master's level, which is our highest level of performance. It also shows and indicates for all content areas that are assessed. It also shows that we are performing again above the state and the region average. And again, breaking down and drilling down a little more, we can see by student group the percentages for those students, for all student groups, alongside with the Fort Bend state region averages of the performance at the master's level. At this point, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Uday, who will discuss academic growth.
Good evening again. At this time, I would like to walk you through some of the academic growth data, and what I would like to point out about the academic growth data for our students and our schools. This information is wrapped up in what we call Domain 2, or student progress, and it has become the single most important factor in the new accountability system as the state rolled out 8F letter grades for the district this past school year, 2017-18, and will begin to rate each campus on an 8F system this year in 2018-19. The same formulas will be in play for 2018-19, but now instead of meeting standard or being improvement required or not rated as a campus, each campus will earn an A, B, C, D, or F in each domain and overall as a score for the campus. This is the area where we most appreciate some of the efforts in the state and federal accountability system, because it really is about ensuring that every single student demonstrates a year worth of growth, regardless of the program that serves that student, regardless of what student group that student is in. It is important to us to ensure that every student achieves at least a year worth of growth from where they were performing last year on scale score to where they are performing this year on scale score. So if you will notice, in the prior slides, it was speaking to student achievement, which was about passing rates. Now we're focused on how much growth, regardless of where the student started last year, how much growth were they making this year as measured by STAR. And when you look at the line graphs, or I'm sorry, the bar charts here, you will notice that while we are performing above the state and the region in terms of academic growth, we're narrower here. We're closer to the state and region numbers. And this is a paradigm shift that you will hear us speak to throughout all of our discussion tonight, is that it is very important that we shift the mindset away from simply passing to ensuring growth. And there are a variety of ways to do that. We don't simply look at STAR, though STAR is a major part of our TAPER report for the year. So this group is broken down by subject area, and again, we're above the state and region slightly in each of the main subject areas, summing across all grade levels. And then the next chart breaks it out by student group, which means race and ethnicity as well as program areas. And again, we're fairly close to the state and region here and want to ensure that this is an area we accelerate performance, that we really look at what tools can we use to help ensure we're intervening so that students get a year or more worth of growth, not only on STAR, but on other tools that we have that we'll speak to this evening. The next chart is one of the ways that one of the new tools that you have provided for us to have that really does help us gauge progress during the year. Everything you've seen to this point is really a kind of a historical statement of how our district has done and how students did last year on a given day on a singular STAR test. This data is data that is current and that helps us assess our students on track to make the kind of progress that they need to make in order to be successful, not just on STAR, but as they get ready for college and as we develop them throughout the system to become our graduates and to attain the attributes of the profile of a graduate. So what this particular chart represents is our middle of year reading performance on a universal screener called REN 360. And you will notice that the green charts point out the percentage of students who are showing to be on track from beginning to middle of year for earning adequate growth or a year's worth of growth. The blue bar represents the number of students who need interventions in order to try to attain that year worth of growth. And the neat thing about the REN 360 tools is that we can assess where they started at the beginning of the year, how much progress they've made by mid-year, but we can also use tools in the system in the interim, and the tools are right in the hands of our teachers to immediately intervene for students versus having to wait another year for a STAR test. Teachers can use these tools to see exactly what skills students have, what they still need to gain, and even some ideas about what to do to try to affect that growth for our students. And we will come back and report at the end of year to the board on how we're doing as of end of year on this progress measure. So this is reading, and next we will look at the math progress information. Again, middle of year. You'll notice a term up there called SGP, and that stands for Student Growth Percentile. This is actually a proprietary formula for REN 360 where they do some norming of the data, but basically they have it down to a pretty strong science as to if a student is achieving a student growth percentile measure of anywhere from a 35 to a 60, then they're on track to earn a year worth of growth. So this is the percent of students who, in the green, are achieving that amount of growth as of mid-year to be on track for a full year worth of growth. And again, the blue bars are representative of students who continue to need intervention and support in order to attain that year worth of growth. Let's move now into some of the secondary measures for the district. And these measures are broken out in several categories. And keep in mind that this data that you are seeing now is at any point 2 years old due to the collection process and submission through our PEAM system. But you have 3 years worth of longitudinal data on the 4-year graduation rate. So you have the percent of students who have graduated out of the class of 2016, and you'll see more data on them in just a moment. And then those who received a certificate of high school equivalency, formerly known as GED, as well as the percent of students who've continued in high school, those who have dropped out. And dropout may mean that they stopped coming to school and did not finish. It also may mean in the system that we could no longer track where they were in order to gather that data. And then the accumulation of all of those categories. And so you will notice over the last 3 years that our data is trending up slightly, about or just under 1% on the graduation rate for the district as a whole. The class of 2016 specifically, TEA assesses both a 4-year and a 5-year graduation rate and gives us the better of those two scenarios to determine our rating. The 4-year rate is the traditional student who graduates in 4 years. They collect data on the 9th grade cohort and then see who's still present at the end of the 4 years. That's a federal definition that all states abide by. The 5-year rate is because there are some students who continue on into a 5th year or possibly longer, but usually 4 or 5 years captures most students in the cohort. And then provides the same information, the graduation rate, those who earn the certificate of high school completion, and so on. So in this case, the cohort of 2016 had a 94.4% graduation rate, and if we go to the 5-year, it was the 96.2% graduation rate. Our dropout rate for the district is less than 1% compared to the state and region. The region is at 2.3 and the state is at 1.9, again for the class of 2016. And then here we have the graduation rate data broken down by student groups over the last 3 years. You will notice that we're trending up slightly in the area of graduation for the district. And then we have the breakdown by ethnicity as well as special programs. One of the areas that we took a bit of a hit last year, or last cohort, was our English learners. The graduation rate dropped to an 80.7%. However, it is now trending back up, and we intend to keep continuing that pattern with the great work that our multilingual department is doing to ensure students are supported properly in their learning environments. And you'll notice too that our economically disadvantaged is trending up, and as well as our special education population as well. And then last, we have some summary level information. There's much more detail to this in the full district report. But we are required to report on violent and criminal incidences, things that are more serious safety concerns. And so you'll notice in the footnote there that TEA requires us to report certain code types for discipline incidences. These are very serious types of incidences where someone has been harmed. It might have been like a felony type violation. Those types of things would fall into this category. And so the chart up left is representative of the number of incidents divided out by the number of students enrolled in the district. So you have district, elementary, middle, and high school level. And then the pie chart represents the percentage of the incidences in the district that were at each of those levels or at a district-wide level. Again, much more detail in the full TAPER report than we're able to summarize up here. We break it out by each campus in the full report, as that is a requirement of our public reporting. Okay. Now we will turn it over to Mrs. Stephanie Williams, who will speak to the instructional supports that are being provided through Academic Affairs and Teaching and Learning to support our campuses who we're seeing trends that we want to disrupt. So she'll speak to those this evening.
Good evening. While a cursory look at our data shows that Fort Bend ISD is outperforming both the region and the state in all content areas, we have identified internally some patterns that must be disrupted. One of those patterns is a pattern of academic performance in certain content areas, and one that we're all very familiar with is around literacy, specifically early literacy, and the goal that we've set to have students reading on grade level by second grade. So knowing that we are looking at a growth model across the state of Texas and certainly within Fort Bend ISD, we focus our efforts across all campuses on professional learning tied to formative assessment processes. The idea that as we develop students as owners of their learning, they understand what it is they're learning, where they are in the learning process, and they become a partner with our teachers in learning that content so that we can ensure the growth of all students. So that would be across all campuses, the professional learning focus. But then within academic affairs, we identified 12 campuses where we saw performance declining in one or more content areas. We also noticed things like turnover or leadership changes that had occurred when we identified those campuses. In partnership with school leadership, we began a needs assessment process in the fall. Through that needs assessment process, we started first with campus systems, because we can talk about a declining rate of academic performance, but until we identify the root cause for why that might be happening, we can't make a change for students so that we're growing all of our students. So we looked at master schedules on those campuses, and as we were looking at master schedules, we were looking primarily at two things. What was the opportunity for teachers to engage in planning, instruction, and professional learning? And how was the master schedule supporting an intervention or enrichment need of all students? What we found was that in many cases, the master schedules were absent those two criteria that are critical to find growth across all student groups. So we worked in the fall to add additional staffing in order to ensure that a comprehensive intervention structure was in place, and also to provide teachers with structured time for planning instruction so that we could ensure that the instruction that's going on in the classrooms was aligned to the curriculum. And that's where the biggest wheel is, the professional learning communities. That is where the work that occurs that ensures that all students have growth is going on in Fort Bend. And we have been working in partnership with campus leadership through our campus support team process to ensure that there's first a structure for professional learning communities that's in place, that it's consistent, that there are protocols where the curriculum is open, where we're looking at alignment of all instructional materials to the rigor, and where we're using data, and not just the old STAR data, but more importantly, the formative data that's going on in campuses each day. The next slide provides you with a little bit of a picture on 4 of the schools that we're focusing on through our campus support team walkthrough structure. So first of all, we go monthly to these campuses. We'll have 5 walks throughout the year, but also intermittent visits from the campus support teams. And those teams are made up of academic affairs personnel in teaching and learning, the Department of School Leadership, and also the campus leadership team. And many of our campuses invite teacher leaders to go on the walks. Within the campus support team structure, we reinforce the instructional pedagogy that we're looking for, so that we can see that students have ownership and that they're growing in their learning. We also provide job-embedded professional learning either through our instructional coaches, our teacher leadership cadres that focus on the instructional models of balanced literacy and guided math, or through additional layers of support through our Region 4 team that comes in where campuses are in need of more consistent guidance each week around professional learning communities. When you think about the professional learning community, we found that first and foremost, we had to focus on the structure and how they're using their time to make sure that there was equal time distributed among what is it we're going to teach and how we're going to teach it. And then when we have data, that we're not just looking at a percentage, but that we're looking at specific content that a student is not doing well in and designing an instructional approach to change that. Our team from Teaching and Learning has been to the campuses each month and sometimes multiple times each month in content areas working and modeling instruction and designing instruction alongside the teachers. And then we've been working on the use of data. So a percentage tells us who is or is not at mastery, but the content that you can find in the REN 360 instructional planning reports tells us what skills it is that students are struggling with. And so it's very important that that is used in order to group students and design the instructional plan. If you think about a transition to a community-based accountability system, to what will we hold ourselves accountable? In Fort Bend ISD, we want to hold ourselves accountable to the growth of all students. And one of the signals that we can give you to show that we're focused on that growth is how our professional learning communities are functioning. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Anthony Indelicato, and he'll speak more specifically around the not rated schools.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good evening. So we have, as this slide shows, we have 2 campuses that are rated a comprehensive improvement school, which is Hunter's Glen Elementary and Lantern Lane Elementary. As the slide shows, they are based on the Closing the Gaps domain scaled score, and it's Title I schools that are ranked as the lowest 5% that receive title funds that determine if they're a comprehensive improvement campus. So again, we have 2 campuses. They, as a result, are receiving support of a professional services provider, also known as the PSP. And this is someone from an approved list by TEA that comes and gives ongoing support and coaching to help make sure the campus stays on track to meet standard this upcoming school year. As well, there's ongoing support for these 2 campuses from various departments that we collaborate together with, including the Department of Teacher Development, Academic Affairs, and of course Department of School Leadership. So we certainly feel the urgency for these 2 schools to show immediate improvement and to show growth in all our students. So these 4 campuses, we have 4 schools that are officially labeled as not rated because as a district, as Dr. Udi mentioned earlier, we are considered a district impacted by Harvey since we missed at least 10 days of school last school year. So as a result, these are 4 campuses that if they would have received an overall rating of improvement required, that their actual rating is not rated. At the same time, again, you can see for each school which domain or domains they did not meet the standard. And again, we're taking this extremely seriously that we realize it impacts the students directly, and so we have a lot of plans in place right now to address and show continuous growth. So just like Ms. Williams mentioned a second ago, we have this same image here of the wheels that turn, because when you improve in one, you impact the other 2. And so we're definitely in collaboration with Academic Affairs. And so I'm going to touch base on some of each of these here. if we start with the blue wheel, professional learning communities, that is critical, as Ms. Williams just mentioned as well. And that's teams of teachers working together to make sure when they have assessment data, they work together to plan lessons, and then of course planning interventions is needed for those students that are not performing at the level they need to be. Many of our campuses are also having gone through either last year or this year the relay learning, and there's components of the DDI process known as data-driven instruction that also is embedded in the professional learning communities. So you'll also see near the blue wheel Region 4 coaching. We contract with Region 4 to help provide support to the campuses as needed, whether it be professional development or ongoing coaching with observing teachers in the classroom and giving them feedback as well. There's also coaching of the principals themselves by the assistant superintendent that oversees the school in DSL. And the assistant superintendents are also receiving the relay learning as well to ensure we have alignment and fidelity to the processes, and we're building capacity across the board. Lastly, at the bottom you'll see lesson planning and through a backwards design process, and that is, we plan campus formative assessments first to make sure they're rigorous enough, and then after planning the assessments, then we match the instruction accordingly so we have consistency in terms of rigor. And through our relay learning, we want to have high quality lessons first that the teachers then internalize and even practice key components before they go live teaching with students. So if we transition over to the black cog at the top, campus systems, we have relay at the top. Again, this is a instructional leadership year-long PD from TEA that Relay delivers. This is year 2 that Fort Bend has had selected campuses involved in that. Also, then we have intervention supports. So as Dr. Udi and Ms. Williams have mentioned, the most important thing we continue to stress to all our campuses and our teachers is that every student is expected to grow. We are past the time where it's simply just getting students to pass the test. So it's critical that through our intervention supports that we're monitoring that all students are growing, not just who's struggling, but that everyone is moving forward. We also have our all-in mentoring program. You may remember that last year was the first year with that, where we have mentors here at the administration building. We have a board member as well that had mentor students. Last year, it was at Ridgemont Elementary. This year, it's transitioned to Lantern Lane Elementary, which is one of our campuses in need. And we have 70 mentors working with 70 students at Lantern Lane, grades 3, 4, and 5. And they spend 30 minutes once a week working with the student, both academically and serving as a positive adult influence. And then we move over to that red wheel, kind of looks black on the screen, but it's the leftmost one, formative assessment processes. And we have tracking student progress. And so again, it's just being very intentional, knowing where each student is. Are they making progress during the school year? And if not, if they're not growing, then focusing very specifically on what skills are they struggling with and putting a plan in place to support them. At this point, I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Dr. Udi.
So in summary, based on our TAPER report for Fort Bend ISD, our highest priorities center around developing the instructional model along the lines of the curriculum that has been written. We're in year 2 of the new curriculum and year 2 of the instructional model to ensure that student ownership of learning and to ensure students understand what they know, what they need to know, and how to get there. And so through our campus support team walks, we have focused on understanding whether or not students learn what it is that they are to be accomplishing for the day and how they're going to demonstrate that success. One of the highest priority areas for us in doing these walks and working through our support systems has been around literacy and closing achievement gaps between our various student groups. To say that we've had kind of a flatline performance over the last 5 years is certainly a pattern that we want to disrupt. I will also note, though, that during that time there have been several changes in the accountability system, and we didn't receive dips in our performance during that time, so that's notable. However, it's our desire to ensure that trend is up in every area, and literacy most impacts all of the other performance areas. So, for example, the new Early Literacy Center that we've started this year in in one of our feeder patterns, we are looking at expanding into other feeder patterns as well. Tonight, I'll reference this website as well. After tonight, the entire TAPER report will be there that breaks out all data by grade level, by subject, and all of the various forms of data that we have summarized in short for you tonight. That is made available so that the public may be able to view it and see what questions they may have, and we'll entertain those questions and help answer them as people need to have additional information. We have now arrived at the questioning part of the public hearing this evening and are prepared to entertain questions from the board and the public.
Thank you, Dr. Udi. Mrs. Helliger?
Thank you, Dr. Udi. I just have some clarifying questions for me. I'm going to start from the beginning. On page 3, I know we have program participation. We have the different, areas in which we service our children. And so I'm interested to know what's the percentage of our kids that are not in any of these groups and kind of where they fall. So program participation, isn't that all of our students, or is it just?
So these are just our special designation areas where students may receive additional supports. So for example, our special education population has to meet eligibility criteria, or English learners need to meet criteria, and you may have some students who are represented in more than one of these groups as well. I can get information for you on how many students don't meet any of those indicators. That's not a part of the information we have here in the TAPER report tonight, but it's something that we could figure out for you.
So well, then clarify for me then, is I thought the TAPER report is looking at all of our students, not just these special indicators.
So all of the data that we presented here tonight includes all students, all subjects. However, we have special criteria to evaluate how some of our student groups are doing, broken out by these special groups.
So are you? Okay, so I'm sorry. So are you just telling me? Are you just showing me on page 3? These are just the percentage of our students that are in the program. Is that what you're saying? Okay, all right.
One of the details that TEA uses to compare us as a district to other districts when they're looking at our student populations to see, do you have similar numbers of disadvantaged students?
Okay.
And it also plays out by campus as well.
All right, thank you. Then on page 5, you have the STAR performance levels, and I'm assuming just what you're showing me here. Excuse my question. I just want to make sure I'm understanding what was presented to me and how I should look at it and evaluate it. Is that based on STAR scores? These are the scores that need to be met versus 2017 and for 2018, right, in those particular areas, correct?
Yes, ma'am. 2 years ago, TEA broke out the data in a different way than they had in prior accountability systems. And so we have these new categories of did not meet, approaches, meets, and master's grade level, and cut points that you need to achieve to receive that performance label on an individual student's performance. And so anything that is in the approaches, meets, or master's area is considered by Texas to be a passing standard for that particular subject area. And so the score, for example, if I go down to approaches on the bottom left, it says that the approaches cut score was a 1470 scale score for 2017, and that remained the same cut score in 2018. And then to get meets, I had to jump up to at least a 1582, and that continued as the same for the next year. And then for masters, I had to have at least a scale score of 1667.
Okay, so that particular slide shows me that basically that the performance criteria did not change from 2017 to 2018, right? So then if I go on to review, so I like that we, in a lot of the areas, we are above the state and Region 4 in a lot of these areas, but then when you break it down to the actual data of who is meeting those, that's where I'm challenged and I have opportunity. So tell me if I'm wrong, help me out. If I'm looking at this as a whole as 100%, the entire district is 100%, and if I see this and I'm looking at it, it says I'm looking at page 7, page 10, and page 12, I believe. 7, 10, and 12, because all those are from grades 3 to 8 in the EOC.
So it's summed across all of those grade levels and incorporates all of the students in all of those grades and all subjects.
And that's what I thought. So then the numbers don't add up to me. That's why I'm questioning. So if these three is all of our sum of our the totality of our students, if you're saying that 73% of our students in African American approaches grade level, then we're showing 42%. So if you explain to me why it's different than the meets grade level.
You've got 3 different sets of data here over the span of the slides that you mentioned. The first grouping here is approaches grade level or above. So it incorporates all students with a passing score. So this includes students who may have made approaches, some who met meets, and some who met the master's category. The way it's very complicated. So the way the system works for calculating our performance ratings is that a student who earns the approaches level would count, for example, as 1 point for each test that they passed. A student who earns meets counts as 2 points. And a student who makes masters counts like 3 points. That gets accumulated and then divided by 3. So we add up the percentage of approaches are above, meets are above, masters, and divide by 3 to come up with a scale score for each domain.
So then when I guess that's how you all do it. I would like to see.
Let me address that if you don't mind, because I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, what she just said in short is if you look at page 7, African American, 73% or approaches are above. But if you take out those who are meets and those who are masters, you find 14% of the students are actually approaches only.
So you want me to do the math?
No, no.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
in other words,
just
73% of our African American students pass all of their subjects.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that means then the other 27% we need to intervene with.
I guess for me, that's another data point I would like to have seen then. Okay. So that's good. That helps me out because I didn't understand it. And I guess my last question would be, well, I have several more, but the special education is at 45%. It's 45% of overall children and students that passed approaches grade level and above, correct? And so not knowing what that special education is really built of, I'm interested to know from last year, I know you asked the question earlier, which I really need to see that information, what the difference was from last year versus this year to see what the growth was in that particular area and in the other subject matters as well.
Okay. And we'll refer back to some charts that we presented in the fall around passing rates. Now, growth rates, we can't go back very far because that's a new factor, but we can produce some trend lines for you that show the actual passing rate over 3 to 5 years, depending on which rating category. Approaches, the passing category, we can show 5 years. If it's meets or masters, because that's so new, we can only go back 3 years on that data.
Yeah, okay, because some of it just seemed, some of it just seemed, I couldn't tell really what our total growth was. And then on page 15, am I reading this, is this 1 through 12, is that the month, grade levels, or what is that?
Yes, ma'am, that is
Okay.
grades 1 through 12. And again, the green shows who is on track to earn growth, and the blue shows those who are not on track to earn a year's worth of growth. Therefore, we're intervening with these students.
Okay. All right, okay. That's all the questions I have for right now.
Thank you, Mrs. Helliger. Mr. Rosenthal.
Yes. Can you just remind me which EOCs are included in our overall ratings?
Algebra 1, English 1 and 2, U.S. history, and biology.
And so if a student takes algebra in 8th grade, is that included?
It's included in the district performance, and it would be included in the middle school
But
performance for
not
that
in the high school
student.
performance? Okay. Because I remember we talked about this either last time or,
It's an issue
within
that
the
comes
year.
up all the time. How
Right.
do we give credit to the high school, or how do
Right.
we work with what the federal requirements are
Right.
for testing again in high
Yeah,
school?
that's what we were talking, okay. And so I have more of a comment, I think. When you look at, actually, this chart right here,
Okay.
I like this because I think, in my opinion, it shows that if we can get to kids earlier, which is what we're doing, the whole thing behind this early literacy center, and the results that we saw last week were incredible. If we can do that all over the district, then those green bars at the end are gonna start rising too, because, you know, when you're dealing with a student, say in middle school, and they haven't gotten that stuff earlier, it's really tough. You know, it's tough on the teachers, and you know, the kids they're not, it's gonna be difficult to get onto that green track. And so I think that's why it's critical that we focus a lot of our attention and resources kind of at those lower levels, so. And
Positive impact on the entire
right,
feeder.
and what we're doing with that, with our student ownership learning, I think really fits in nicely with that, especially since it's mostly targeted toward the elementary levels, so.
Well, Mr. Rosenthal, if
Yes.
you look at the graph, what you said actually plays out in the graph there.
Right,
Because if
exactly.
you look at 10, 11, and 12, well,
Yeah.
actually 11 and 12 specifically, the bars get much closer to each other
Yep.
because it's much more difficult to intervene.
Exactly.
The later kids matriculate into the
Right,
system.
and so those are the kids those kids in the blue in 11 or 12 were, you know, maybe kind of on the border or in one of those blues at younger grades. So, yeah, so I think that's critical. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Mrs. Tossian.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. Thank you for the presentation. The first thing I want to do before I say anything is I want to acknowledge our principals who are sitting over here. You guys weren't introduced to us, but we know who you are. And so I just wanted to say thank you for being here, because this is the most important thing that we do. And this board recognizes that, and we talk about it quite a bit. And we understand that our number one job is student achievement and making sure our kids learn and that they have opportunities when they leave us. So I know it's not easy to lead a school that's struggling, and when you have kids who struggle every single day. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that. And the fact that you're here and taking responsibility and ownership is incredibly important. And I know it's important to us as a board because we talk about leadership quite a bit too. So I just wanted to acknowledge you guys and thank you for being here. I wanted to go back to Ms. Helliger's comments, because I think what she's asking for, so I did the math, and this is what she wants. She wants to see African American 31% approaches, 25% meets, 17% masters, and 27% fails.
Okay.
And I think she wants to see it that way, and it would be helpful to us, because then number one, we don't have to do the math ourselves. But number two, then we can see better where our gap is. And that helps us a little bit more, because the difference between approaches, meets, and masters, I think, is important. Just like looking at our where our failure rate is, I think that's important. So I would agree with her. I think I'd like to see it broken out that way by population, because it may help us just analyze a little bit better where we are.
Okay.
Was that accurate? Okay. Okay, good.
Okay.
Secondly, so probably the most, I'm also very happy we exceed state and region in every area, and that's fantastic, but obviously it's not good enough for any of us, as you said. Probably the most troubling part of this for me is growth. If we have kids who are not getting a year's worth of growth, my question is why? Why aren't they getting a year's worth of growth? Because I personally don't care if they pass the STAR test. I mean, I care, but I understand that's an arbitrary bar that it's very hard to get some of our kiddos to, and I think that our commissioner has acknowledged that as well in developing, working with us to at least redevelop this system. But every child should be growing a year. And if they're not growing a year, then we need to know why. And I think my fellow board members and I want to know what can we do.
Well,
how can we
Ms.
support
Williams
that?
Help respond to this too, but I think the key here is the formative assessments, like the Universal Screener Ren 360 and other formative assessment tools like common formative assessments, learning assessments, et cetera, that are in the teacher's hands immediately to turn and intervene early and instead of waiting for some.
But do our teachers, are our teachers supported to be able to intervene? And I alluded to this last week. You know, so that's great. And I'm with Mr. Rosenthal. I love seeing this, and I think this is going to help us tremendously. But do our teachers really have what they need in the classroom to intervene? I mean, are they being supported? Because our teachers are wearing so many hats and doing so many things, and particularly with our kids in struggling schools. What do we need? I mean, we implemented EDGE a few years ago, and it has been by and large successful in those schools. And we have asked some questions about what portions of the EDGE model are we implementing. And I know some of you responded that we're taking some of those and implementing them. And some of EDGE was the teacher structure so that we had support for our kids.
So I'm going to try to answer all that. I'm going to give you an example of what happened at Krista McAuliffe just a week ago. Andre, Mr. Roberson, asked us to come out and look at his data with him and his leadership team. And we had the Renaissance 360 data, and we were looking by classroom, by child. And what we recognized is that there was a significant level of support that was needed for kids. And so he actually adapted his professional learning this past Friday to have our team come out and sit in content area teams with teachers. So we are prioritizing the right skills. The intervention resources as far as content is there, and I believe it's strong. We were able to identify in all content areas what it is teachers could use to intervene. In all of our discussions this year, we've talked about that because when you look to the right of the grade levels, the higher grade levels need a stronger intervention, that at our secondary schools, for a while, there is a need for more interventionists and for a master schedule that is more innovative to allow teachers time, because the only way to grow students who are not performing is more time in the content that they're struggling with instructionally. And along with that more time comes a need for teachers to be able to have the planning. Now, at his school, they do have daily planning where they meet and they have leadership there to do that. But that's one example of the support that teachers are getting. And if I could speak across the board at all of our schools, the consistent feedback we get is we need time in order to look at this data and make the decisions for our kids. And that comes through professional learning communities and some extended time, not just that 45 minutes that teachers are given.
Okay, so that's helpful, and I just do want to make sure that our teachers are feeling supported in the classroom to make sure that they not only have the planning time, which that's also on my list, because having a daughter, especially with a disability, every single teacher in this entire district has got to have planning time. So it's a little bit troubling to hear that the master schedules are not being put together where there's enough planning time. So I just want to say that because I really feel like that has to happen at every school, or the kids are going to suffer and the teachers are going to suffer, and then we're not going to be optimizing our learning. So
to answer the second part of your question with respect to EDGE, when we implemented instructional coaches with our Title I schools, that was a layer of support that we didn't have in EDGE that we have for reading and mathematics or for literacy and mathematics at our secondary schools.
Okay.
So you bring up some good points and just some additional information. So, in terms of supporting teachers, so with our relay model, we have, anytime we give a mini assessment, it could be anywhere from just 5 questions to a longer assessment. One thing that we work through is identifying the biggest misconception the students have, to identify really not just that they get it right or wrong, but where is their error? Where is their misunderstanding? And from that point, we have, as Stephanie just mentioned, the coaches, which help the teachers really kind of identify that and break that down, because everyone has varying levels of comfort with the content. And so the coaches help fill in any gaps that are there to then help put a plan in place to go back and intervene. And then as well for the most serious needs, students with the largest gaps, Those are our Tier 3 kids, and they're the ones that the interventionists spend the additional time with as well. Definitely agree with you as far as the planning time and maximizing the master schedules for schools. And so that's one thing that DSL has continued to work with in terms of having options. That actually tomorrow at the principals meeting, we're going to talk with elementary campuses about options for next year to help maximize the master schedule with planning time and continuing to also engage with our secondary campuses as well.
Good. Well, thank you for that. I really think, the teachers are key. Good leadership, but teachers are key, so we have to make sure we're supporting them. The last thing I'll say, and this goes back to something Stephanie said also, is that we all know literacy is really the foundational building block for all of this. And so this board was very supportive of the Early Literacy Center, and I won't speak for my fellow board members, but I feel an urgency to expand that. Like Mr. Rosenthal said, the more that we do, the bigger the gap's going to be between the green and blue line down in 11 and 12. And the older they get, the less intervention is really possible. So I feel an urgency about kids slipping through the cracks that are already at the secondary level, and we've expressed that previously. We have got to get our kids reading. And in my opinion, whatever that takes, I am willing to support. Whatever it takes. That's the only way they're going to have a chance. So thank you all very much for your work.
Thank you, Mrs. Tolsan. Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine, and thank you, Ms. Uday. I would just like to echo Mrs. Tasson's comments that the board is part of Team Fort Bend ISD, and we're here to make sure that you have what you need. And if we don't give it to you, then shame on us. But if we don't move our schools, our campuses out of improvement required, the Commissioner of Education can come and tell us all to get off the dais and move into the chairs with everybody else, and they'll install a board of managers. So we do have an incentive to do the best we can to provide you with the tools that we need. And so I want to echo some of Mrs. Tasson's comments about literacy, because we had a reading recovery program that was used in Fort Bend ISD for many, many years. It was quite effective, but we had to change that in order to leverage how many students we could serve, because the cost per student was high, and money is always an issue. And so when I hear you talking about the teachers need time to work with students that need more teacher intervention, that means we need more teachers, in my mind, and all that takes money. So the state is working on revising how public education is funded, and one of the things they're talking about is additional funding to help get all students reading on grade level by the 3rd grade. I'm glad that our goal is the 2nd grade. And I wonder if we could somehow have an outreach program for parents, even though we don't have a full day of high quality pre-K across the district like I would like to have. Maybe we could have some things on the website and some sort of community outreach to touch parents whose children are not in pre-K, but at least give them guidance on books appropriate for 3 and 4-year-olds leading up into kindergarten, even though we can't perhaps formally teach them at this time. Maybe there's some guidance that we could put out there and share with some of our faith-based organizations in the community, so they have some sort of structure or some sort of curriculum, if you will, to follow in trying to get our kids reading on grade level. I know there's a direct correlation. If the kids are reading on grade level by the 3rd grade, there's a good chance they're going to graduate, and the inverse is also true. So having said that, I just want all of our teachers to know, as I believe I share this with the board, that this is what we do. making sure that all of our students receive a quality education. And we want to support our teachers. We want to make sure we understand the challenges that you face in the classroom as leaders and working with your teachers, and give you the support that we need, that they need. And lastly, will you please remind me about the STAR exam, when that is administered? And it's my understanding that it's, it is a high-stakes test because it occurs